Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbull with your nightly review for Thursday, May 9th. It's 4:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Dow Jones finished down 22 points to 15,082. S&P 500 down 6, or 0.4%. Both the Dow and S&P are thus off their all-time highs. Nasdaq finished down a whopping 4 points, or 0.1%. Gold 1455 down 18. Oil 95.90, and the 10-year Treasury closed at 1.82%. Little to talk about on the economic front, except weekly jobless claims fell to a 5-year low, 323,000. It's January 2008. The 4-week average is now the lowest since November 2007. And one stock note, Consumer Reports gave the Tesla S model its highest rating of any car, electric or otherwise. And the shares soared about 30% today, last I checked. Tesla now has a market cap greater than Fiat. Go figure. London, Paris, and Frankfurt. Well, London was up 0.2%. Paris down 0.6%, and Frankfurt up 0.2%. Back to the S&P and Wall Street. According to S&P Capital IQ, earnings for S&P 500 companies will come in at record levels, about 5%, increase of about 5%. However, as I've been discussing, revenue growth for the same S&P 500 companies is expected to come in at just 1%. So cost cutting and stock buybacks have kept profits moving higher despite the sluggish growth, or 2% economy that we seem to have settled into, and so revenue is going to continue to grow very slowly in that kind of environment. In China, the Consumer Price Index rose 2.4% year on year in April, so that's a slight rebound from the 2.1% pace in March. Inflation is extremely important in China. The rise to 2.4% was fueled by a jump in the cost of food, up 4%, especially vegetables. Well, with tainted chicken and rats being sold as lamb, you gotta eat the veggies. So I hope, or I assume, demand for veggies is sky high in China. Real veggies. Core inflation, stripping out the volatile food prices, actually rose just 1.6%. Remember, the government's inflation target is 3.5%. But this is telling. Producer prices fell deeper into deflationary territory in April, down 2.6% year on year. And that has to do in no small part to unused factory capacity. In Slovenia, the government has announced a package of measures it hopes will help avoid an EU bailout. The measures include a tax increase, a major restructuring of Slovenia's banking sector, and a program of mass privatization. The European Commission will now consider the plan and will deliver its verdict by the end of the month. Slovenia has been in recession since 2011. Well, yesterday I told you I watched the Benghazi hearings, so following are some thoughts from the media and thoughts from myself. Gregory Hicks the Deputy Chief of Mission, who was in Tripoli, described for the House Committee how a routine day on September 11, 2012 quickly turned to tragedy thanks to the terror attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi. Republicans are pressing ahead with the investigation 8 months after the attacks, and Republicans insist the Obama administration is covering up information, and Democrats decry the politicization of a national security issue. Republicans have faulted former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Representative Jason Chaffetz, Republican of Utah, choked up as he lamented the 4 deaths in Benghazi and accused Clinton of ducking blame for inadequate security. Chaffetz said he was astonished that Clinton still has the gall to say, "It wasn't me, it was them." Republicans and Democrats furiously traded charges. Hicks, who was very soft-spoken, presented a lengthy recollection of the events and expressed frustration with the military that he argued could have prevented the second attack, which is the point of my special video on Andrea Mitchell. Hicks and 2 other State Department witnesses criticized the review conducted by former top diplomat Thomas Pickering and retired General Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Their complaints centered on a report they considered incomplete, with individuals who weren't interviewed, with a focus on the assistant secretary level and lower. Hicks said he was watching television at his villa in Tripoli when he first got word of the initial attack. He listened to 2 messages on his cell phone and Stevens' chilling words. "Greg, we're under attack." I should have said it, U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens. "Greg, we're under attack," the ambassador said. Hicks described a series of phone calls to the State Department and Libyan officials, frustrating efforts to find out what was happening in Benghazi, and a call from Clinton. "Secretary of State Clinton called me along with her senior staff, and she asked me what was going on, and I briefed her on developments," said Hicks. Most of the conversation was about the search for Ambassador Stevens. It was also about what we were going to do with our personnel in Benghazi, and I told her that we would need to evacuate, and she said that was the right thing to do. Republicans at the hearing focused on the talking points used by UN Ambassador Susan Rice on the Sunday talk shows, in which she said the attacks appeared to be associated with demonstrations in Egypt and Libya over an anti-Islam video. Representative Trey Gowdy, Republican, South Carolina, said Rice's comments contradicted statements by Libyan leaders and others who called the attacks premeditated assaults by terrorists. Gowdy said Rice's comments perpetuated a demonstrably false narrative. Hicks asked his reaction to Rice's comments on the talk shows, said, quote, "I was stunned, my jaw dropped, and I was embarrassed." Democrats countered with a video clip of Director of National Intelligence James Clapper telling a Senate panel earlier this year that the hit on Rice was unfair. "She was going on what we were giving her," Clapper said. Hicks said, "The defense attaché said to me that fighter aircraft in Aviano," that's in Italy, "might be able to get to Benghazi in 2 to 3 hours. This is the point of my video. Democrats pointed out that this contradicted the testimony of former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who testified before a Senate panel on February 7. "The bottom line is this," said Panetta, "that we were not dealing with a prolonged or continuous assault which could have been brought to an end by a U.S. military response. Very simply, although we had forces deployed to the region, time, distance, the lack of an adequate warning, events that moved very quickly on the ground prevented a more immediate response. Why didn't we have teams on standby in this region in particular and at Aviano on the anniversary of September 11? Pentagon Press Secretary George Little said Wednesday that the commander told the team leader to stay in Tripoli because the evacuation was let me back up, different issue. So after the first attack, a security team left Tripoli for Benghazi with 2 military personnel, but Hicks said 4 members of a special forces team in Tripoli wanted to go in a second wave, but were told to stand down. So the Pentagon Press Secretary George Little said the commander told the team leader to stay in Tripoli because the evacuation of U.S. personnel out of Benghazi was already beginning, and the team would not arrive in Benghazi in time to provide any assistance, which is just a bunch of BS. Colonel David Lappin, spokesman for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that by the time the team would have left Tripoli, the second attack in Benghazi was over. That is false. You know, we talked about the anniversary of September 11. We had no trouble scrambling fighter jets here on September 11. Editorial, Wall Street Journal. After Stevens and an aide were killed at the mission, the militias turned on the CIA annex nearby. On the advice of the military attaché in Tripoli, Hicks said he asked for U.S. fighter planes to fly over the complex in an attempt to scare the attackers away, which was a proven success. Libyans had seen U.S. air power during the NATO military intervention in 2011 and might have fled. But Mr. Hicks was told no planes were available. Early the next morning, 2 Americans died in a mortar attack on the CIA compound. The Pentagon, this is the Wall Street Journal editorial, the Pentagon says no F-16s were on call that night. But why not? Why weren't contingency plans in place? The State Department's supposedly independent review panel said in December that there, quote, simply was not enough time for armed U.S. military assets to have made a difference. The review blamed lower-level officials for the security failure and didn't even bother to interview Mrs. Clinton. Mr. Hicks said he was effectively demoted after Benghazi from Deputy Chief of Mission to Desk Officer. Journal concludes, the immediate press spin on Wednesday's hearing is that there was no smoking gun proof of a cover-up, as if that is the only reason to find out what happened. It's clear enough already that senior administration officials knew in September they had a politically potent debacle on their hands and did their best to delay and obfuscate any accounting. All of this warrants further investigation, and such oversight is part of Congress' job. This whole deal is sad, it's tragic, there is a major cover-up, and yes, it's also just pathetic. Editorial, Washington Post, on the situation in Syria. What will unfold in Syria if the Obama administration persists with its policy of providing humanitarian and other non-lethal aid while standing back from the fighting? The most likely scenario is that Syria fractures along sectarian lines. An al-Qaeda affiliate, Jabhat al-Nusra, is already consolidating control over a swath of northeastern Syria. I have to admit, I did not know that they were actually consolidating control of a major portion of the country. Remnants of the regime, backed by Shiite fighters from Lebanon's Hezbollah movement, could take over a strip of the western coastline. That I knew. Such a splintering would almost certainly spread the sectarian warfare to Iraq and Lebanon. as it has to some extent already. That could cause the collapse of the Iraqi political system. That was the legacy of the U.S. mission there. Chemical weapons stocks now controlled by the Assad regime would be up for grabs, probably forcing interventions by Israel in order to prevent their acquisition by Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda. Jordan, the most fragile U.S. ally in the Middle East, could collapse under the weight of Syrian refugees. Turkey and Saudi Arabia, which have been imploring the Obama administration to take steps to end the war, could conclude that the United States is no longer a reliable ally. In short, there are substantial risks for the United States to intervene in Syria, but also grave dangers in its present policy. On Tuesday, President Obama said his job was to constantly measure what actions were in the best U.S. interest. It's not an easy calculus, to be sure, but for 2 years, as Mr. Obama has heeded the warnings about U.S. engagement, the situation in Syria has grown more dangerous to U.S. interest. There are no good options, as everyone likes to say, but it's becoming increasingly clear that the greatest risk to the United States lies in failing to take decisive action to end the Assad regime. That's an editorial in the Washington Post. And oh, by the way, in Bangladesh, the death toll from the garment building collapse, 931. That's all for this week. I'll be back with you on Monday. Please check out my Week in Review, which I post very early Saturday morning, like normally 12:01 a.m. Appreciate your support. If you haven't seen the Andrea Mitchell video, watch it now. It's on my channel, right there. Take care.